trailer was never meant to be lived in. It sat alone, deep in the mountains, surrounded by snow, miles from the nearest town. When they finally opened the door, everything inside looked usable. There were matches. There was food. There were blankets. Enough to survive. And yet, the man they found inside had starved to death. Not quickly. Slowly. Over weeks. Which raised a question that still hasn't been answered. Why didn't he use any of it? A few months earlier, 5 friends piled into a car on a cold winter night. They weren't criminals. They weren't reckless. If anything, they were predictable, routine-driven. The kind of guys who showed up early, left on time, and didn't take risks. People trusted them, counted on them, especially on nights like this, because that night mattered. They had a basketball game the next day, a big one, and they were excited. Not just to play, but to win. Each of them had their own quirks. One was quiet. Another talked too much. One struggled with anxiety. Another relied heavily on structure. But together, they worked. They understood each other. And that made them a team. On and off the court, that night started simple. A drive. A game. Some snacks. Nothing unusual. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that should have ended the way it did. Because by the end of that night, that same car would be found abandoned in the middle of nowhere, miles off course, pointing toward the mountains, and none of them would make it home. Earlier that day, everything had felt normal. They met up like they always did. Same spot, same energy. Talking about the game. Laughing about small things that didn't matter, but somehow did, because this wasn't just a game to them. It was structure. It was purpose. Something they could look forward to. Something they could control. For some of them, life wasn't always easy. Simple decisions could feel overwhelming. Unexpected changes could throw everything off. But basketball, that was different. The rules were clear. The goal was simple. And when they played, everything else faded into the background. That's why this game mattered so much. They had practiced. They had prepared. And they had every intention of showing up the next morning on time, like they always did. That night, they drove out together to watch another game, just to enjoy it, to relax, to be part of something they loved. Nothing about that decision was unusual. After the game ended, they stopped at a small convenience store, bought snacks, drinks. The cashier would later remember them. 5 guys, acting normal, nothing strange, no signs of stress. No signs of panic. Just a group of friends heading home. And that's the last confirmed moment anyone saw them alive, acting like themselves. Because somewhere between that store and their homes, something changed. Their route home was simple, straightforward, a drive they all knew. There was no logical reason for them to leave that road. But they did. And not just a wrong turn. Not just a small detour. They drove deep into the mountains. Away from lights. Away from help. Into cold. Into isolation. Into a place where none of them should have been. The road home should have taken less than an hour. A straight shot. Familiar. Easy. They had driven it before. More than once. There were no confusing turns. No reason to get lost. And yet, at some point that night, they didn't follow it. No one knows exactly when it happened. There's no footage. No phone records. No witness who saw them turn. Just a gap between the last place they were seen and where their car would eventually be found. At first, nothing about that drive would have felt wrong. Music playing softly, the hum of the engine, headlights cutting through the dark, 5 friends heading home. But then, something shifted. Maybe it was a suggestion, a wrong turn, or maybe someone saw something that made them change direction. Because instead of continuing toward the city, they began driving away from it. The streetlights disappeared, the houses thinned out, and the road started to climb. Higher, colder, darker. Out there were no gas stations, no open stores, no easy way to turn around. Just long stretches of road, winding deeper into the mountains. And the further they drove, the more isolated it became. Snow lined the edges of the road, patches at first. Then more, then everywhere. The temperature dropped, fast. And still, they kept going. Which raises the question, why didn't they stop? Why didn't anyone say, "Hey, this isn't the way home"? Because this wasn't just one person making a mistake. There were 5 of them. 5 chances to notice something was wrong. 5 chances to turn around. But they didn't. They kept driving deeper into the dark. By now, they should have realized something was wrong. The road wasn't just unfamiliar anymore. It was difficult, narrow, winding, barely maintained. This wasn't a route you'd take by accident and just keep following. The snow started to thicken. What had been light patches turned into a steady layer across the road, tires crunching, traction slipping. The kind of conditions that make most drivers turn around immediately. But they didn't. The car kept moving. Slowly now, carefully, climbing higher into terrain that didn't make sense for where they were going. Inside the car, something must have changed. Because silence like that, and a situation like this, doesn't happen for no reason. 5 people, all noticing the same thing, all feeling it, but no one saying it out loud. Maybe they thought it was temporary. Maybe they believed the road would reconnect. Or maybe someone in that car was convinced. They knew where they were going, and the others trusted them. At some point, they reached a section of road that was almost completely covered in snow, deep enough that the tires struggled to push through. The car slowed, then stopped. Engine still running, headlights still on, illuminating nothing but white. This was the moment, the point where everything could have gone differently. They could have stayed inside, waited, turned around, even walked back the way they came. But instead, they made a decision, one that would define everything that followed. Because at some point in that freezing, silent darkness, they opened the doors and stepped outside, leaving the car behind. When the car was finally found, it didn't look like an accident. It wasn't wrecked. No broken glass. No damage to the body. It was just there, parked on a remote mountain road, surrounded by snow. The doors were unlocked, one window slightly open, and the keys were gone. At first glance, it almost looked intentional, like whoever left it planned to come back. But nothing about the location made sense. This road wasn't on their route home, not even close. To get here, they would have had to drive miles in the wrong direction, deeper into the mountains, into colder, harsher terrain. And the strangest part, the car wasn't stuck. Later reports suggested it might have struggled in the snow, but it wasn't trapped. not beyond saving. With a little effort, it could have been moved. Which raises another question. Why leave a working car in freezing conditions in the middle of nowhere? Inside, there were small details that made things even more confusing. Wrappers from snacks, half-finished drinks. Nothing looked rushed. Nothing looked panicked. It didn't feel like a sudden escape. It felt like a pause. And yet, whoever stepped out of that car never came back to it. Search teams would later stand in that exact spot, trying to make sense of it, looking at the road, the surrounding forest, the direction of the wind, and over again, they came back to the same conclusion. There was no clear reason for them to be there, no obvious threat, no visible danger, just a quiet road in the middle of the mountains, and 5 men who chose to leave their only shelter behind. Not long after the car was found, search teams began looking for tracks, and at first, they found them. Footprints, leading away from the car. 5 sets, all moving in the same direction. They didn't scatter. They didn't split up. Whoever left that car left together. The tracks headed up the road, not back the way they came, not downhill toward lower ground. Up, deeper into the mountains. That alone didn't make sense, because going uphill meant colder temperatures, deeper snow, and less chance of finding help. But the direction wasn't the only strange thing. The spacing between the footprints was consistent, not rushed, not erratic. They weren't running. They weren't stumbling. It looked like they were walking, calmly, deliberately, which raises another question. If they were in danger, why weren't they moving faster? And if they weren't in danger, why leave the car at all? As the search teams followed the tracks, they noticed something else. At certain points, the footprints became faint, then disappeared entirely. Not because the trail ended, but because the snow had drifted over it. Meaning, those men had walked this path during active snowfall, in freezing temperatures, at night, with limited visibility. And still, they kept going. Miles passed. The terrain got rougher, more isolated. And eventually, the tracks led toward something no one expected. A small structure, deep in the forest. A trailer. Old, weathered, barely noticeable from a distance. The kind of place you wouldn't find unless you were looking for it. Or unless you already knew it was there. The trailer wasn't meant for people like them. It was a service unit, used by forest crews, left out there for emergencies. Inside, it had just enough to get by. Basic supplies, food rations, blankets, matches. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Snow piled up against the walls, the door half buried. No lights, no movement. When search teams approached, they didn't expect much. Maybe a clue, maybe nothing. They forced the door open, and immediately, they knew something wasn't right. Inside, it wasn't empty. There were signs. Someone had been there. Food had been opened. Some supplies were missing. Blankets had been moved, but not in a frantic way. Not like someone was panicking. More like someone had stayed. Lived there for a while, and then they saw him, lying on a bed, wrapped tightly in blankets. Still, it was one of the 5. His body was severely underweight, almost unrecognizable. He hadn't died suddenly. He had wasted away, slowly, over time. And the most disturbing part, there was food in the trailer. Plenty of it. Boxes of rations. Enough to last weeks. Maybe longer. Untouched. Which meant He didn't starve because there was no food. He starved while surrounded by it. The closer they looked, the stranger it became. He wasn't just lying there. He had been arranged, carefully wrapped in blankets, layered for warmth, like someone had tried to keep him alive, or at least comfortable. His beard had grown out, his hair longer than before, which meant one thing: he had been inside that trailer for weeks, maybe longer, surviving, waiting, but not using everything around him. The food supplies were right there. Military rations, high calorie, long-lasting. Some had been opened, but most were still sealed. There was also a heater, a working one, but it had never been used. No attempt to start it, no signs of fire. In temperatures that regularly dropped below freezing, which raises another question: why would someone choose not to use heat in a place like this? Then there were the shoes. He wasn't wearing his own. Instead, he had on someone else's. Larger, different, meaning he hadn't been alone, at least not at first. And if someone else had been there, where did they go? Because the other 4 were nowhere inside that trailer. Not alive, not dead, just gone. And whatever happened in that place didn't happen all at once. It happened over time, slowly, quietly, with decisions that don't make sense even now. The trailer wasn't the only place they searched. Far from it, because long before that discovery, there had already been signs that something had gone very wrong. About 11 miles from where the car was found, searchers began locating bodies. Not together, not in one place. Scattered. One was found near the road, partially covered in snow. Another deeper into the forest. They hadn't made it far, which was strange, because if their goal was to find help, they had chosen the wrong direction and then barely followed it. The cause of death, in those cases, was exposure, extreme cold. They hadn't been attacked, no signs of violence, just the environment. But even that didn't fully explain it, because they were still relatively close to the car. Close enough that turning back might have saved them. And yet, they didn't. They kept moving in the opposite direction, further away from safety, further into isolation, which suggests something important. At that moment, they believed they were doing the right thing. And that's what makes this case so difficult to understand, because these weren't random decisions. They were consistent, shared. 5 people making the same choice, again and again, even when those choices led them deeper into danger. As the search expanded, investigators tried to build a timeline, not of what happened, but of how long it happened, because the distances didn't add up. From the car to where the first bodies were found, it wasn't a short walk, especially not in deep snow, at night, in freezing temperatures. And yet, they made it that far, which means they didn't panic right away. They didn't collapse immediately. They kept moving for miles, step by step. At some point, one of them must have slowed down, then another. The cold would have set in gradually. First numbness, then confusion, then exhaustion. And still, they didn't turn back, even though their only real shelter, was behind them. Then there's the timing. Based on the condition of the bodies, it became clear that not all of them died at the same time. Some died early, out in the open. But the one in the trailer survived much longer, weeks. Which means at least one of them made it to shelter and stayed alive long enough to eat, to rest, to think, and still, for some reason, he didn't fully use what was available, which creates a gap in the story, a period of time where something happened, something we can't see, because there were no notes, no recordings, no explanation, just silence, and a series of decisions that don't line up with survival. There was one more problem, one more piece that didn't fit. One of them was never found. Gary Mathias. Unlike the others, Gary was different. He had military experience. He had training. He knew how to survive outdoors. If anyone in that group could handle a situation like this, it was him. And yet, he's the only one who completely disappeared. No body, no confirmed sightings, nothing. Which raises a different kind of question. If the others struggled, why didn't he? Because evidence suggests he made it to the trailer. Clothing found there didn't belong to the man inside, but it matched Gary, which means at some point he was there, alive. And if he was there, then he saw the supplies. He knew about the food, the blankets, the shelter. So why didn't things change? Why didn't he take control? Help the others? Or at the very least, save himself? Because based on everything we know, Gary was the most capable person in that group, the least likely to vanish without a trace. And yet, that's exactly what happened, which turns him from a victim into something else. A missing piece. One that might explain everything or nothing at all. Investigators were left with fragments. A car in the wrong place. Footprints leading deeper into danger. A trailer full of supplies and decisions that didn't match survival. So they started with the simplest explanation. They got lost. Maybe they took a wrong turn. Maybe they thought the road would reconnect. And by the time they realized the mistake, it was too late. That explains the direction, but not the behavior. Because getting lost doesn't explain why 5 people would leave a working car and walk into freezing conditions at night. Another theory, they were trying to find help. But that doesn't hold either, because help was behind them, not ahead. Then there's the idea that something scared them. Not something visible. Nothing proven, but enough to make them leave quickly. The problem is there were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of a threat, and if something had forced them out, why walk calmly? Why stay together? Then there's Gary. If he reached the trailer, he would have understood the situation. He would have known what to do. Unless something affected him too. Something that made clear decisions feel unclear. Because one detail kept coming up again and again. Their actions didn't look random. They looked impaired. Like they were thinking, but not thinking clearly. Cold can do that. So can exhaustion. So can fear. But even then, this level of consistency across 5 people is hard to explain. And that's where the case stops being simple. Because every theory answers one question and creates 3 more. In the end, there's no single moment that explains everything. No clear mistake. No obvious cause. Just a series of choices that don't feel like choices. 5 men leave a normal night behind. Take a road they had no reason to take. They pass places where they could have stopped, places with lights, with people, and instead, they keep going, higher, older, further away from everything familiar, until they reach a point where turning back would have made the most sense. But they don't. They leave the car, walk into the dark, together. Some don't make it far. Their bodies found not too far from where safety once was. One makes it to shelter, finds food, warmth, time, and still doesn't use it. Another vanishes completely, no trace, no ending. And that might be the most unsettling part, because this doesn't feel like chaos. It feels consistent, like something influenced them, not forced them, not chased them, but guided them, just enough to keep them moving in the wrong direction. And we don't know what that was. Maybe it was confusion. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was trust, placed in the wrong moment. Or maybe it was something simpler. A single bad decision, followed by another and another, until there was no way back. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't what you can see. It's what feels just reasonable enough to keep going. And by the time you realize you were wrong, you're already too far in. And there's no one left to tell the story except the silence they left behind.